You are comfortably zoned with the Zigzag Man in Alameda, California, pushing on the doors of life marked pull and fighting the Unholy Trinity as we go. Big business, organized religion, and government.
I am back, and you are comfortably zoned with me, the Zigzag Man, Ralph Tyko, Alameda, California. 420 Studio down by the Lagoon in Alameda. I don't know if my first guest knows about that. You know about the Lagoon? Doug Biggs, who is one of the foremost executive directors of nonprofits in Alameda, and a political guy, let's put it that way. And I like to talk to people with political opinions who are not opinionated, like my dear old self, I guess you might say. Doug Biggs, what do you hear? What do you say?
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure. This is a small town. We've both been here a number of years, and I just want to say how much I admire you as a former executive director for a nonprofit that just didn't work. Yours works. Tell me about it a little bit, and tell me about yourself and why it works.
Well, all nonprofits struggle. My nonprofit is the Alameda Point Collaborative. We provide supportive housing for homeless families out on repurposed or in repurposed housing at the old Naval Air Station in Alameda. And we serve 500 residents, including almost 300 children and youth. As to why it works or how it works, I think there's a couple of things. One, it hasn't always worked. It's like any nonprofit starting up. It was a huge struggle. We were created out of the closure of the Naval Air Station. We were given rights to the property because of some federal legislation, but it wasn't exactly a warm and fuzzy welcome by the community of Alameda. As you can imagine, Alameda has never really embraced the homeless issue, and so there was a lot of pushback in the initial years that made it hard to get up and going. But I think we've really overcome that, and now have what I believe to be a sustainable community, and a community that is really having a very positive impact. I think part of the reason it works is my background is in community development. Back in the 70s, I started out as a Peace Corps volunteer overseas, and I was actually just having a conversation with somebody else this morning about community development. And there's kind of two approaches you could take to community development. One of them is you can walk in like the expert and say, gosh gollies, what you guys really need is a road. And the community's sitting there going, the last thing we want is a road, because we earn our money off of hauling stuff on donkeys, and if we have a road, we'll lose that income or something like that. The other approach to community development is to walk into a community and say, what is it you want to accomplish? What do you want this community to look like? And we've tried to do that here at APC. A lot of what we've created has been a direct result of the residents that are here saying, we want this, whether it's a playground, whether it's a farm, whether it's a garden, whether it's a type of programming we offer. When it's successful because it's something the residents have wanted and needed. It's not something that we think people want.
Okay. You mentioned the garden, and we've talked off the air. You're growing food in an area that was given to the city. It was a naval base during World War II. And basically it came back to the city for $1. And part of the responsibility was that they would take care of the toxic waste that was dumped right off the shore during during the war, and how much of that has been completed? How much of that waste disposal has been completed? And we joke about it, but you eat food that you grow in a garden that serves the homeless.
Sure.
So, would you? I mean, it's not me bringing this up for the first time in your life, I'm sure. I don't know if are you serving the homeless by exposing them to, not only by living there. I lived out on that base in my motorhome for a long time. I know the risk one takes from the standpoint of an increased amount of what you breathe in, what you eat, what the water's like. And you probably said, "Hey, I eat the food. I grow the food. You don't grow them on special platforms or anything. You grow in the ground." Address that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and there is a lot of misunderstanding about the environmental cleanup out here, the environmental situation out here, and just to give a background, my degree, which I never used a day of my life until I got here, was in environmental sciences. I started out, again, I don't know, you're a young man, so you don't remember, but back in
yeah, I'm young. I'm 68 years old next month. I'm the oldest bees in Alameda.
In the early, I grew up in the Southwest in New Mexico. In the early 70s, we had the very first Earth Day, and I was, as a high school student at that time, very involved in environmental issues, and went on to work with the Sierra Club, and then because we felt they were too mainstream, and that was a time when they adopted some semi-racist policies around immigration, went to other groups that were a little more radical, and I even had the pleasure of working with a young man at that time named Dave Foreman, who went on to form Earth First, which, if you know anything about the environmental movement, is a highly radical group. They've been involved in some monkey wrenching, shall we say. So that's kind of where I come from on the environmental point of view. I came with both a huge skepticism about what people say about the environment, but also because I worked with a number of scientists that were involved in environmental issues, learned a lot about the science of the environment. What we have out at Alameda Point, so first off, it's, as with any surplus naval property, it's a Superfund site. A Superfund site not only means that there's contamination, but it means there's very specific protocols put in place to make sure those contaminations are dealt with. Out at Alameda Point, as with any others, there's kind of there's four parties that are involved in the cleanup out here. There's the Navy, and the Navy has primary responsibility for doing the cleanup. So even though they've sold the land to the city, they're still responsible for cleanup of anything below ground.
That's nice to know that they didn't just hand it over. And
they're responsible for perpetuity. As long as there's contamination in the ground, and even after the contamination is out, they're responsible for monitoring it to make sure that no contaminations come back. You have the EPA, the Federal Environmental Protection Agency. They're responsible for monitoring what the Navy does, and they're responsible for setting standards, for saying the cleanup has to be done to this level, and then coming back in and checking to make sure it has been done with that. Then you have the state.
Have these standards been met? Has the Navy been lagging over the years with this cleanup?
The standards have all been met. Now there's sometimes some frustrations in that, these standards are, and I'm trying to think of one that comes to mind, but a standard around a mineral, and I'm drawing a blank on what it is right now, but that already exists in higher levels in the ground than what the standard is. So it exists now. So in that case, they're not going to meet the standard, but everybody understands why. So the EPA.
Well, what are the effects of that mineral? That negative effects potentially on folks, and are they opening the city opening itself up to lawsuits in case, people get sick, leukemia, this, that, and the other thing?
That's a naturally existing mineral. And it exists naturally. They do baseline studies. So, for example, they'll study a comparable area that's not at Alameda Point.
Right.
See what the baseline level is. They'll study other parts of Alameda and see what the baseline level is. That baseline is already higher than what the standard is. So, and in some cases, they bring it down to the standard at Alameda Point. One of the areas so you've got the EPA. You also have the Department of Toxic Studies, DTSC, and they also provide a checkpoint so that they monitor both what the EPA does and the Navy does. And all three agencies have to sign off on any cleanup. And lastly, you have a group called the Restoration Advisory Board, which is made up of those entities, but also the public sits on that. And they do provide an advisory role. They don't have to approve everything. They just provide advice, but they can, if they don't agree on something, they can force changes. And if they're not happy with something that's going on, then the EPA really has to take notice of that. And I'll give you a good example of that. The Navy, so the way this process starts is the Navy, in essence, does a preliminary assessment and says, this is what we're going to look for in this area. And they're not doing the whole base at once. They're doing specific areas. And so whenever they look at areas around my housing, I pay attention very closely. So they come out with a tentative plan. And so, for example, they were looking for PAHs, which is polyaromatic hydrocarbons. And those could be carcinogenic. PAHs are what you get if you barbecue meat and if you burn your toast. But it's also a byproduct of refineries. And here's what's interesting. Way back before the Navy got started out here, you had industry. You had industry along the Oakland Estuary. You had industry along Main Street. And one of those industries were oil refineries. And so
didn't know that.
You can imagine that they didn't do a great job of pollution prevention back then. And so they dumped stuff into what was at that point an estuary. And it created what's called the marsh crust now. And that's a level of soil anywhere from 2 feet to 25 to 50 feet below ground that contains a higher proportion of these PAHs. In areas where, even though the Navy didn't create this problem, because it's on their property, they have to solve it. So in areas where it's close to the surface, they've dug it out. And in areas where it's deeper, and it's not just at Alameda Point, it's in other parts of Alameda. And so if you go downtown, you can get a copy of the Marsh Crust Ordinance. And that has restrictions on how deep you can dig without a permit and what are some of the precautions you have to take. And that's not just for Alameda Point. That's other areas of Alameda, anywhere the marsh crust exists. So, for example, they were looking at marsh crust stuff out here around our housing. And in their preliminary plan, they laid out a number of boring holes of where they were going to drill to measure this stuff. When I looked at it, I didn't feel that there were enough boring holes around, for example, our offices, around the Head Start, a couple other areas. So I went to the RAB and I said, I don't believe this is adequate. The RAB turned around and said, we don't think it's adequate either. So EPA forced the Navy to do additional borings. And the results showed that there weren't any issues of concern.
Okay.
I got to spot the borings that they did, and I got to tell you, there's always this skepticism about their making up the data and whatnot. The sampling they did, the samples they got were more tightly controlled than O.J. Simpson's. I got to tell you, they, evidence checking everything was very thorough, very careful, and I was really impressed with it.
Okay, so
kind of the
you're living it. I mean, you're out there eating the food and living it. What was the thing that gives you the one final thing that gives you the confidence that you're going to be okay, or it's just as okay as any place else that we might encounter?
So a couple other things that give me the okay is, one, we asked the EPA, we said the same thing to them you're saying. Okay, we've got this food going in the ground. What are the possible, what could get taken up into the food? And it's not just, when the Navy was here, they planted apple trees as well. And some of those apple trees give the best apples I've ever had. So, but we wanted to know what was in here. And so the EPA came out. They did a whole separate study called an uptake study. They brought in a crew from Las Vegas, and they went out and they collected samples. They collected tomato plants, not just our tomato plants, but tomato plants that are being grown in the big whites. They collected samples from fruit trees. They had a whole bunch of different crops that they picked throughout our property and other properties. They picked dandelions, because in the spring, if you come out here in the spring, you'll see a lot of families, primarily Asian families from across Alameda, out here picking dandelion shoots. So they picked all that, they sampled it, and they found absolutely no evidence of any uptake at all. So nothing is getting picked up into the plant. And the reality is, for almost all plants, the root structure is very narrow. A tomato plant's not going deep. So the one potential that was there was for PAH, and it's not reaching that level. So there's absolutely no uptake of any plant, in any plant material, any fruit, vegetables that's grown out here. We went
beautiful.
We got
that answers it. A lot of it hinges on one's intrinsic trust of the government itself.
Absolutely.
So we also number of agencies, and you probably have more faith in the government, basically, than I do, just from the standpoint of what's been told to us, certainly me in my lifetime, about the war in Vietnam, about going back to Pearl Harbor with FDR. I just, my antenna goes up. My bullshit detector goes up if there's anything around the government.
And I see that with the RAB, the Restoration Advisory Board, all the time, that they walk in with their bullshit antennas on alert. But if you sit here, if you watch the line staff who's actually doing the tests and realizing the way they're doing it and seeing it yourself, there's no way you can fake that. There's no absolute way that it gives you trust. Now, having said all that, after we had the Navy do the test, after we had the EPA doing the test, then we went out to St. Mary's College and said, because we have a very good partnership with them. They bring a lot of volunteers out to help us. They have a science program and a science instructor who's been following this very closely, and who also has kind of the same, I don't believe it unless I see it.
Skepticism is all, just
wanting to hold on to the data himself. So he brought students out, and they did their own testing, and confirmed the results.
Beautiful.
So kind of
hey, listen, that's more due diligence than I ever would have thought went on. Not just by you, but by the city.
Right. There's one other point I want to make about the environmental cleanup. Ed, you'd asked how much of it is done. I think right now, and don't quote, well, you're going to quote me on this, but I think it's somewhere between 85 to 90% of all the cleanup has been completed. And it's all being cleaned up to residential standards. Now where some people get upset, and I saw it actually in your favorite politician's statement the other day, concern about the fact that the groundwater isn't getting cleaned up to residential standards. Well, nobody in Alameda, anywhere in Alameda, uses the groundwater for drinking. We all get our water from the same pipes, whether you're at Alameda Point, whether you're at Bay Farm, whether you're in housing for the homeless, or whether you're in a $2 million mansion. You're getting your water from East Bay mud. It all comes from the same location. We do not utilize water.
People fish. They recreate in the water.
But that's not groundwater. That's not groundwater.
Oh, okay.
I'm talking about water in the ground, and the water in the ground is being cleaned to commercial standards, and that standard. I mean, nobody in Alameda drinks groundwater. Nobody in the East Bay drinks groundwater. It's just we don't need to. We have water from.
Well, I'm just curious. What if there was a drought, and there is now? But what if it lasts another 3 or 4 years, and we run out of water? Would they be digging for groundwater? Would that be an issue?
No, particularly in Alameda, because you are right that the groundwater does interact with the salt water, and so if you dig 5 feet down in Alameda, you'll probably start getting water seepage, and some of that saline. So no, we would never use the groundwater in Alameda.
Okay. You taught me something, Doug. I appreciate that very much, and I want to ask you a little bit about what works with your nonprofit. What are the things you've run into that you didn't expect to run into when you started the nonprofit, good and bad?
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I don't know. Every day I'm surprised by what goes on.
Well, sometimes you just wake up, you're surprised to wake up in the morning, which is a good thing.
Exactly. What has surprised me the most? Well, okay, a couple of things that have worked and haven't worked. That have worked are some of our social enterprises. We have Plowshares Nursery, which sells plants to the public. And what's worked about that is it's changed how people. One, it's been a great job training opportunity for residents because it really builds self-esteem. And most of the residents we have have disabilities. A lot of them are survivors of domestic violence. A lot of them are veterans. So there's a huge self-esteem issue going into this. And growing a plant and watching somebody buy it is a huge success. But beyond that, it changes how people in Alameda view APC. We're not, that homeless encampment over there. We're a place where you can buy high quality plants, and so that's been a nice change.
You also have a bicycle, a refurbished bicycle thing going, which really intrigues me because Alameda would be the perfect place for it's flat and scenic, a great place to ride a bike. And I for one think that bicycles would replace, eventually alleviate a lot of the traffic jam. That's the biggest negative factor in Alameda right now.
Yeah, Changing Gears Bicycle was, again, this was another social enterprise, and the whole thing about social enterprises is it's something we chose to make part of our mission, and the reason for that is as part of our agreement with the city for existing out here. There's a goal of having residents employed in 15% of the new jobs created out at Alameda Point, and we can't ask others to do that if we're not doing that ourselves. So we've consciously worked to have employment opportunities within the agency for residents. The bike shop was started initially. It was started as a way to provide some opportunities for our youth. Teach them how to fix up bikes, get them involved in bike riding so they could ride bikes to school. And it became hugely popular in that the bikes that were fixed up, people wanted to buy them. And so we went from a point of initially subsidizing that program. We were putting about $100,000 in it a year to where it was beginning to make money. And so at that point, what we chose to do was spin it off into a separate company, because we're social workers. We're not business people. And sometimes social work can get in the way of them making running a business. So it's run entirely as a business. It employs residents, but it's making it on its own, which is,
it's not under the auspices of the nonprofit.
No, it's a separate company. And when you talk about wanting to achieve self-sufficiency for residents, this is the same philosophy. We're achieving self-sufficiency for businesses. Our Plowshares Nursery eventually will become the same thing. It'll be a separate company.
Well, what is the schooling like? I mean, I'm sure some of these residents have children. Is there a preschool set up? Elementary school, high school? What's going on there? I'm sure the high school is Encinal, which is right down the street.
Yeah, no, great question. We so our main function is to provide housing for homeless families, and we're actually the largest provider of housing for homeless families in the East Bay. Of our 500 residents, almost 300 of them are children and youth 18 and under. So huge children population, huge challenge dealing with those issues. Nationally, there hasn't been a whole lot of attention paid to homeless children, and what are the impacts of homelessness on children? How do we help them overcome the trauma, and how do we help them break that cycle? One of the main things that we see is kids coming into our housing are oftentimes way behind in school, 2, 3, 4 grade levels behind in school. Now, when they get here, we work really closely with the school district to get them enrolled. And typically, there is protection. There's what's called the McKinney-Vento Act for homeless services, and a child is entitled to keep the school they were at while they were homeless. So if a child doesn't want to shift schools around, they could still go to the same school. And some of our parents take advantage of that. And that seems to work better if you've got a kid who's like in their last 2 years of high school in Oakland. They may stay there rather than transfer just because they're finishing up there. We've had some parents try it with kids in first, second grade, and they eventually transfer into Alameda just because, one, the schools are so much better, and two, it's closer. Most of our kids for elementary school, they go to Ruby Bridges. Middle school, they'll either go to Woods or the Alameda Academy, which is the charter school that used to be Chipman. And for high school, they'll go to Encinal or Island High School, which is a continuation high school. We have a number of kids there. And a number of them used to go to Base School until it moved out of Alameda.
My son went to Base. It's a charter school, and if I can make a plug for them, they were terrific and still are, and still doing the job. And I think it's a great school. So
it works really well for our kids, because a lot of them do respond better to some non-traditional teaching methods and more one-on-one.
Exactly. My impetus on it all is that we all respond to the non-traditional way, which has proven to be lacking in a lot of ways. So, just out of curiosity, has the non-traditional way of these charter schools been incorporated into the public school system a little bit? Have they learned from each other? Have they taken from each other?
To some extent, I think so.
Okay.
But, you're still in the public schools, you're working with 30 kids in a classroom, and if you can get 25 to do well, that's great. I mean, so what we're seeing with our kids when they come in is they're 2, 3, 4 grade levels behind, and it's something we've struggled with for years. Last year we tried out a new program called iReady, and it's based somewhat on the work of Khan, the Khan Academy. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
I'm not.
It flips things around. A lot of it's computer based, and you do what you would normally do in the classroom on the computer. So you're doing your work, and then the teacher can monitor that work, see what specific area you need help in, and work on that. So if you need help on verbs, that's the attention you get. If instead of doing a whole class on verbs for everybody when everybody else is getting it, it's just focusing on you. We've seen tremendous results out of that. We've had kids that were 3 grade levels behind get up to grade level in literacy in a matter of 6 months.
Wow, that's terrific.
And we're expanding it this year to include a math component. And we went from a one-room little computer station that had maybe 5 to 6 kids to, once kids started seeing some success in this, more kids started showing up. And we were having 20, 30 kids in a session. And, they had their laptops out on the lawn in the hallway because there just wasn't room. So we've now moved it to a bigger space and are able to do a lot more. I was talking to the coordinator this morning, and yesterday she had some kids working on the iReady program. She had a small group of kids doing a computer class, had some preschoolers doing some basic reading, and had some kids getting tutored in math skills in the other room. That's something we couldn't do last month because we just didn't have the space. This month we do. So we're thrilled with those results. And we're really, there's been for years, there's nationally among kind of the homeless community or providers community, this talk of, well, kids are traumatized by homelessness. We need to help them become successful, but there's never been this, what does success look like? And now we're beginning to put some parameters on it. So we're able to show that kids who have been homeless can become successful in school. You don't just have to pass them on from grade to grade until they finally drop out. That you can overcome some of those deficiencies. So we're very excited about that work.
That's terrific, and I'm sure it's basically what makes it go is the volunteers from the community that help out to do this.
Absolutely, and some of our volunteers are our residents now. They're taking ownership of this. They're seeing it as their program.
Even nicer. Even nicer. Reminds me, the antithesis might be the Gaza Strip, where people just don't take responsibility for their home, and this makes me happy to hear that, Doug. What are your plans for the future? Anything that's you'd like to see happen in the next 5-10 years that can get it going in a bigger way or modify it?
Sure.
What are your plans for growth?
So, as you're probably aware, there's a lot of discussion now about redeveloping Alameda Point. There's, we've had some failed attempts at, we've had some horribly failed attempts at it in the past, and this time the city's going about it a little bit differently. And I know this will get your hackles up, but they're going about it differently because of, I think, some leadership provided by the city council, the mayor, and the city manager. But we've been working very closely with them on looking at how we can benefit from this redevelopment. In the past, in the early years when there were attempts to redevelopment, the developers were kind of saying, well, we'll just develop around the collaborative. We'll kind of ignore what they're doing, and if we need to fence them off, we'll fence them off. This time, and it actually started with SunCal, even though they screwed the pooch royally, they did one thing that was right, and they came and talked to us and said, how can we work with you to not have us build a community around this old housing? And so, we're living in Old Navy housing. We've built a wonderful community, but it's still Old Navy housing, and it's quite frankly, it can be pretty crappy housing at times. It doesn't have.
Is it in any way retrofit for earthquakes?
We've done a lot of retrofitting, done a lot of work on it. But the Navy never built anything to be permanent. They built it for the duration, whatever that duration is. So every year these require more and more maintenance, and every dollar that goes into maintenance is a dollar that could go into services or build additional housing. So what we're talking to the city about is we're currently spread out over 34 acres. So we want to consolidate our housing on a much smaller footprint, have our service center in the middle of the housing so it's much more accessible, have the housing itself be much more energy efficient, much more accessible for people with disabilities, private where it needs to be private, public where it needs to be public, just be able to learn from the lessons. We've been out here for 15 years now. We've
For how long? I'm sorry.
15 years.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was that long.
We have a culture, we have a history that we want to preserve and improve on. So we want to learn from the lessons of our residents, which, again, is really unique. A lot of times when you're building housing for the homeless, the last thing they do is talk to the people that are going to live there and see what they want. We have the opportunity to do that here. So we're very excited about it. We've actually issued a request for proposals from developers to help us with this process, and we're hopeful in the next 5 years we'll be building new housing. Now, you talk about that having a little bit of skepticism. We're very adamant that we will not tear down our existing housing until we build the new housing, because we don't want to be in this position where the housing is torn down and then somebody says, oops, we can't build the new housing. For the city to do their development through our existing housing is going to be very challenging for them because they have to maintain services. It's very expensive. But if they were able to build us new housing, move us there, and then put in the rest of the infrastructure, it would actually save quite a bit of money. So we're very hopeful. The city's been very supportive of the process, and we're very excited. I mean, I know that the development of Alameda Point and traffic and
traffic. See, that again, the first thing that comes up in anybody's mind, pro or con, for it or against it, is traffic. And for those of you out there, there are 4 bridges and a tunnel in and out of Alameda. We're an island, and we're separated by a man-made estuary from Oakland. And it's the traffic has gotten crazy making.
Here's my take on it. Is I look at it a little bit differently, and a number of folks in the West End do. The first thing that comes up for us is not traffic, it's jobs and economic opportunity. Alameda has a 4% unemployment rate. That is almost entirely concentrated in the West End. The development of Alameda Point is going to finally put us on a par with the rest of the island as far as employment opportunities and jobs. So when you have somebody like, for example, Trish Spencer saying, don't develop Alameda Point, let's keep it all parklands, what she's also saying, and what you're saying, is deny those people the economic opportunities they deserve. The whole reuse plan for Alameda Point is predicated on job opportunities, economic opportunities for people who haven't had them. So when the quote-unquote anti-development crowd comes out, they are also, in my view, and in the view of a lot of people that live out here, the anti-economic opportunity crowd.
Well, I don't think Trish Spencer is anti-development. I think she just wants it done with some sort of plan.
And there is a plan. There's a wonderful plan out there.
But no, I don't mean the plan of what you have going, but the infrastructure of the city just simply doesn't allow more vehicles. And
there's a whole infrastructure plan that's been put together. There's a whole transportation demand management plan. And ultimately, I mean, if you follow these things, you've got Alameda Landing going in. They have their own shuttle system. You've got Marina Village that's there. They have their own shuttle system. Wind River has their own shuttle system. What's the next step after all this? Combine all those resources and get one citywide shuttle system. Is that going to happen eventually? Absolutely.
Okay. Do you think you can develop a shuttle system that will get people in and out without using their own vehicles and alleviating the traffic system? Do you, I mean, is it because you got Del Monte, you got Del Monte's going up, you got
yes, you
the
have
land across.
You have more and more people that are looking for a car-free living, and the fact of the matter is, the people I serve, less than 25% have vehicles. So there's going to be affordable housing. One of the things with and I don't want to get into some of the other allegations about Measure A, multifamily housing tends to serve people who have less vehicles. And Alameda has fought against multifamily housing since 1970s when Measure A was passed. The more multifamily development we can do without increasing traffic. The other issue is the real traffic problem is in Chinatown.
Right. Oh, all those that get, as soon as you go through the tube, you come out in a densely populated area.
And it's going to be much more densely populated. Oakland has just completed EIR statements on developments that are going to increase housing in that area by 8,000 units. So even if we reduced our housing, that side of the traffic is going to get worse. Is it eventually going to get fixed? I have no doubt. I mean, Caltrans is already working on plans for better access to Jackson Street.
Okay.
Cities
Street over from Webster, right?
Cities evolve, communities evolve. What was built 40 years ago isn't going to last forever. My favorite analogy is I live in the west end of town. I live near Longfellow Park. And if you've been by Longfellow Park, there's a beautiful old apartment building there. Well, that used to be a girls' school. It used to be a very uptight, girls' school that taught girls to be morally upstanding, yada, 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 and all that. After that, it became a bordello. Now it's an apartment.
I'm sure there was a time when there was a very thin line.
Communities change. Communities grow. I could just picture people back when the Woodstock housing was put in, saying, "Oh my God, who decided to put that housing in?" Now it's an integral part of our community, and you cannot get on the island and then close the gates to everybody forevermore.
Okay. Hey, Doug, we have a mayoral race coming up in Alameda. I'm a Trish Spencer.
Do we really?
Fan because, hey, she's a humanist, and I can say that from firsthand experience. Tell me the strengths and weaknesses of Marie Gilmore, and tell me what you perceive to be the strengths and weaknesses of Trish Spencer. Yeah, absolutely equal time. I had Trish on a while back, and she's charming, and she is a good politician. You got to be a good politician. She's running a grassroots effort. She's asking for support. There's a lot of criticism of the political way of doing things all over in terms of, well, the support you get. Are they supporting you, or are they just looking for something in return? Give me your view on both candidates, and they both have a lot of the same ideas. Where do they differ?
Okay, well, let me back up a little bit and talk a little bit about not so much my political perspective, but why politics is important to me. I've been involved in political campaigns since before I was old enough to vote. I have pictures of me being at various events going back to John Kennedy, which is kind of interesting.
Really? Wow.
Yeah. My parents instilled in me a sense of voting is very important. I lived overseas in Nepal for 10 years, and while I was there, people finally got the right to vote, and people would die for that opportunity to vote. I mean, there were riots leading up to getting the right to vote. One of the nonprofits I worked at before I came here was an organization called Sojourn to the Past, and we took people to the South, high school students to the South, to not only study the civil rights movement, but meet with some of the the sheroes and heroes of the movement. We met, we traveled with members of the Little Rock Nine. We met with Reverend Shuttleton, who was
I don't know if you know Carol Ruth Silver, who was involved
Sure.
in that way back. I did a terrific interview with her back last year, and I know your spirit. I mean, I know where you're coming from, and I know the priority you place on a voter's responsibility to get the right person.
For my residents here, one of the things I tell them is sure, they don't have a lot of economic power. They have a vote. And in a lot of, particularly in a local election, your vote really matters. And a really good example of that was several years ago we had an election, and there was a candidate who put a lot of money into the city council race. And this was back before internet radio. We had this wonderful show, which you probably remember, called the Don Roberts Show. And
I do indeed. Yes. When it first right here on the internet in Alameda. Yes, you get the news. You tell you where to go eat.
Even before the internet, it was on local cable, and so she got on the show then when she was running. And Don was of that group that absolutely hated the fact that the city had given away land to the homeless. And so he asked her about this. How do you feel about having the homeless out at Alameda Point? And her answer was, I feel like I need to put barbed wire up around my house and carry it. And this is a person who's running for city council. I made sure that tape played on a loop in my office for the next 2 weeks leading up to the election. I'm not telling people how to vote. I'm just providing them with the information. I have, at any given time, about 200 registered voters out here. She lost the election by about 300 votes. So I'm totally comfortable in saying I helped her lose the election. So our residents, our residents do have voting power, and they take it seriously. We had an event last week, and part of the event was a harvest festival, but we had somebody out there registering people to vote, and she got 15 people to sign up on that day. So I take voting very seriously, and I still go to the polls because I love handing it in. So having said that, how I feel about politics and the folks that are running, I'm a huge Marie Gilmore fan. And you talk about Trish being a humanist. One of the things I like about Marie, she allows other voices in the room. And I know that the quote-unquote opposition sees that as the city backing down. But, when the community raised concerns about the golf course, she allowed those concerns to be heard and responded to them. When they respond, it's seen as a victory for, the preservations for the golf course. But it's letting those voices in the room. She let the voices in the room around the Crab Cove land, McKay Avenue land, and it changed the direction the city was going in. She let voices into the room around the rent control, and it's changed how that whole process is working. Tenants came in and said, we don't want.
Let me excuse me for interrupting. What is the status of rent control in Alameda? It works very well in Berkeley. What's the status of that right now?
So the status of that is there are a lot of concerns raised about people losing their having to move out because of these rent increases. There's a rent advisory committee that does non-binding mediation. The city proposed to set up a task force, and I was actually one of because I also serve on the Social Service Human Relations Board. I was one of the members designated to be on the task force. Tenants working through Renewed Hope expressed that they didn't have faith in the task force, and I shared some of those concerns because the task force had several landlords on it, but there is no tenants organization in the city of Alameda, so there was no tenants organization representative. Renewed Hope was playing that role.
Right.
And
these
I was concerned. I was concerned because I think it's obvious that there's people, because of the rental shortage here. There's people that are subletting that are not abiding by all the laws, and so they're afraid to come forward. Even if they are, they're afraid to come forward and complain because likely their landlord's going to evict them. So you had somehow a safe space had to be created for renters to be able to talk, and what Renewed Hope was a facilitation process outside of what the city was doing to be able to get the voice of the renters without exposing them to retribution. That's going on right now. We don't know how successful it is. Hopefully renters are getting comfortable and coming forward, either anonymously or not, to talk with Renewed Hope and the facilitator they've got to start a dialogue. I mean, rent control, you say it works well in Berkeley. I've heard mixed things, not, from everybody. Rent control tends to reduce the amount of availability. In an ideal world, and this world is not ideal anymore, but you want renting to be not necessarily be a permanent thing. You want people to be able to move into ownership and to be able to save their rent money. That's not happening anymore.
Well, wait a second. I don't think that everybody that rents is going to eventually be a homeowner, and I think there's a case to be made that it's cheaper to rent over the course of a lifetime than it is to own a home.
It is now. It can be now. Well, that varies. But one of the things you're finding in Berkeley and in other locations is you can't downsize or upsize. So you now have seniors who are empty nesters still onto 2-3 bedrooms because they can't afford to move because their rent would skyrocket. So you're reducing.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
So there's
no
solution to this.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, but getting back to the politics of folks, again, Marie Gilmore does allow voices into the room. Trish Spencer does not. I mean, and that was very clear. You talk about her being a humanist. She played a really active role, and to me, I voted for her to get onto the school board. I was extremely discouraged with the role she played in trying to prevent Lesson 9 from being implemented. And are you aware of Lesson 9?
You made me aware of that the other day, and I was...
Lesson 9 was a curriculum put in place to provide some education for students in order to reduce the incidence of bullying, particularly for LGBTQ mixed gender people who are facing and still are facing a lot of. Not only did she lead the fight against it, she worked with some very conservative groups, the Pacific Justice League, which goes around suing any school district that implements this, to kind of stonewall it getting adopted. She was strongly in favor of having it be an opt-out program so parents could opt out their kids from having to be exposed to this. She has since then encouraged books that have been banned to not be taught in our schools if they've been banned anywhere else, and there's jurisdictions that ban books that talk about gay parenting, and she suggested those not be taught here. So I kind of disagree with your viewpoint of her being a humanist. There's people she works with, but there's also people she's not inclusive. And I think that's one of the huge differences. Policy-wise, I mean, she doesn't have the gravitas we need to have as mayor. We now have a mayor who can walk into a room, whether it's, going to Las Vegas to try and get some businesses to come here, and they listen to her. We have a mayor who will build consensus, and if nobody, even Trish, I think, can argue that she's been about building consensus. She has the highest record of no votes on the school board that has ever happened. And there's times he's voted no and then turned around and, 2 weeks later talked wonders about a program she tried to get defunded. So I think looking at the record a little closer is appropriate. Some people don't like.
Well, let me tell you how I know her to be a humanist. She was the only one on the school board who showed empathy, showed compassion, showed any sort of human contact with a good friend of mine who had a big issue with the school board. He appeared in front of the group several times. They gave him the runaround from here to St. Louis. And she was the only one that took the time to first come down from the podium, come down from the dais, speak to the man personally, ease his issues, give him a direction to go with his problem, give her card, call me, this is where I'll help you, this is what I'll do. No one else on the school board did that.
And did the guy get his problem solved?
He's in the process of getting his problem solved. See, it's not sometimes whether you get your problem solved. It's whether or not you're spoken to as a human being and given direction to either get your problem solved or not, getting somewhere to go.
Ralph, we're not electing a counselor. We're electing a mayor, and a mayor has to play a very different role. And as far as compassion, I mean, look at Mayor Gilmore.
Well, I came up against City Hall. I'm still in the process of coming up against City Hall. The regime that's in there literally lied to me in writing over a separation of church and state issue that I have an ongoing thing going on with the city.
And if that's
an out and out lie, first a runaround, and then an out and out lie in writing to me that was absolutely insulting. Called me a liar. No, we never did this. It didn't think. You didn't see this. That kind of thing.
I guarantee you that Trish Spencer as mayor, we would have an even closer connection between church and state.
Well, you may not after the lawsuit that I'm intending to bring, because it can't be close or closer. It has to be non-existent. You have to have no connection between church and state to abide by the Constitution. That's how I look at it. I'd like to tax every church synagogue.
She was getting her talking points from highly conservative Christian organizations.
Well, we all get, and they're not my favorite folk, highly conservative Christian organizations, but neither of the unions, the police unions and the fire unions, they're not my favorite folks that are giving Mayor Gilmore support and contributions. I think I'd rather,
aside from the Christian values or the humanist values. I mean, it really comes down to me, do you like the direction the city's going in, or do you not? And I
do not. I think it's become a parking lot. To be honest with you, and I think there are a lot of cheap stores going up. There's dollar stores. I don't like the fact that there's 6 military recruiting stations and not one medical pot club in Alameda.
And there's, I just had 8 residents get a job in the last 2 weeks because of some of the new companies, new shops that are coming into town. That's great. Nobody before Trish, nobody ever offered them those opportunities before. Not only did they get those jobs. But the city, under the direction of the mayor, put together 2 special work readiness events to make sure that our residents, and particularly those on the West End, were at the front of the line for getting the jobs when they were created.
Okay, just for a second, Doug, look beyond Alameda Point and come stand with me on Park Street in any rush hour by the Park Street Bridge in the morning, trying to get out of Alameda. People coming down Clement Street, trying to turn off onto Park Street to get over the bridge. Buena Vista. Every street is clogged like a mother, and every street breeds frustration. I think there's a lot of road rage going on right here in this little town. And yeah, you asked me, is it better? I think it's manifested itself in the last 3-4 years. So I don't think it's better. And I think Trish's what seems like a conservative effort to curtail building is just an effort to not curtail building, but get the infrastructure taken care of before you put more building out there. I mean, there's another 5,000 units going up. There's going to be 8,000 cars. Where are they going to go?
A lot of them hopefully are going to go to jobs here that are being created. I mean, look at the companies that have come in the last few years. You have
so much
outdoors,
looking at it, so much from looking at it from anything but Alameda Point, Doug.
No, look at Bay Farm. Look at Bay Farm. You have Penumbra, which is rapidly becoming the largest employer in Alameda. You have VF Outdoors that's brought a huge workforce, and a lot of local folks are getting hired out there as well. Up at Marina Parkway, you have the Silas Technology coming in. These are not crappy
But
jobs.
these are not downtown Alameda. This is not the Del Monte plant, which is incidentally a beautiful building, and it has their vision for what it can be a beautiful community with parks and self-sustaining stuff. But you know what? I think and if you want to talk about the West End, I'd be pissed, were I you, that Oak Street has the most beautiful, up-to-date library in the country. Now, is there anything that's comparable to something like that for the kids out your end? No. They have a small little room for a library branch on 8th and Santa Clara, which is a schlep from where you are, let alone from any place else. And
we actually have a library machine on site that was donated by the city under the direction of the mayor, or she helped get the grant that got it, that's at our building here. It holds 900 books, most of them kids' books. So a child can literally walk half a block, check out a book, read it, check it back in. It is the most accessible.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're missing the point of the concept of the library. It isn't just a place to go check out books. There, especially the Oak Street, the Alameda Free Library, there are programs for kids, readings for kids, programs for adults, cultural things, speakers, movies come every week, art shows, this, that, and the other thing.
Right, and we have that on site here. I mean, one of the things you have to understand is we're like a neighborhood out here. So we have all the cultural things a neighborhood has out here, even more, which is both good and bad. I mean, there's times you want different neighborhoods to mix, but for the reading programs, for the recreation programs, we have a lot of that on site. And part of that is because, our families don't want to travel very far. In some cases, they can't.
Well, you're underfunded, let's put it that way, because I haven't even asked you about computer access for these kids. Do you have computers
we do.
this? Yeah, all of that. I mean, in the library system, part of it now is people are learning, books on technical books. Technology provides books without them being actually tearing down a tree to build a book, right, kind of thing.
We actually have fiber optic out here. We're one of the few places in Alameda that does. And we're, as we work with that and expand it, we're hoping to get internet access. And particularly when we rebuild, there will be internet access, free internet access in every single unit.
Okay. Now, say something that's, tell me what Marie Gilmore's weakness has been, and tell me something that you like about Trish Spencer. Got to be something. Be objective.
Marie's weakness is she doesn't like to be a politician, and I know you're not going to believe that, but she doesn't. She's not out there looking for a political opportunity every step of the way, and she could take much more credit for the things she's done than she has. She's done, most recently, she helped make it possible for a group of staff and community members to organize this pancake breakfast for victims of the arson fire. She did a lot more to make that happen than folks realize. Something I like about Trish, Trish is, and every politician I meet, everybody that's run for office, whether I agree with them or not, all are doing it for the betterment of the community. They have a vision of what Alameda needs. They're not in it for personal gain, in other words. And Trish is the same way. She has her agenda because she thinks that's the way things should be. I just don't happen to agree with it.
Okay. The main thing I agree with her about is to slow down in downtown growth. Hey, if you want to put businesses way out there on Bay Farm Island, in the business park, if you could make that grow a little bit.
There really is very little downtown growth planned. Very little.
Really? Is Del Monte considered downtown? I consider downtown anything I can walk to. For any of the residential areas in Alameda,
all of Alameda,
it's all downtown.
Yeah, all of Alameda.
Go ahead.
But I consider downtown the main drag along Park and along Webster, and there's very little development in that area.
Hey, Doug, you're terrific. We don't always agree on stuff, but you gave me a very, very good education, and our listener maybe. But hey, just takes one.
Thank you for having me on.
I have an idea of what's going on with your thing on the base, and especially you alleviated a lot of my concern about what's being grown and fed to these folks. In other words, these gardens, you're providing them with shelter, but if you they'll feel better about the food that's going into their system as well.
We have enough things to worry about. Let's not worry about things that we shouldn't be worrying about. Right?
Okay. Well, what's the number one thing that you worry about most in Alameda? Speaking of worry, your words.
Well, I serve on the Social Service Human Relations Board, and we look at social service needs across the community, and there are social service human needs. There's homeless in Alameda that we still haven't been able to house. There's people with mental health issues, and funding out there is limited. And so, my worry, but also my hope is that we can find ways. Alameda takes care of each other, and I really want to find a way to establish something like a community chest or something where the community can donate, and we tap some of these developers as part of their cost of development to not just build infrastructure, but also to build social structure, so that we continue to take.
Doug, you want to know what I worry about? I worry about a police force that is incredibly overstaffed and incredibly out of touch with folks that are not landlords and business owners.
You know,
and do you run into that at all? Is there an issue? Is there does money need to be reappropriated from the city to in the form of maybe a liaison and into the social world of what's going on? I think these cops are trained poorly, and it's not just Alameda, of course, but Alameda has a reputation for a bunch of lunkheads, and I think Steve Peterson, who was allegedly one of the fire setters, just by the way that was handled by the police, is paramount in my thinking of what's going on. He had allegedly had people that were alibis, that the police took him in, booked him, sent him away, set a high bail. And remember, the justice system, the police, the judges, and the DA, they're a little fraternity. So it's easy to get it through. But they have very little, or his bail wouldn't have been so drastically reduced, and they would have at least contacted his alibis that he had been working during the time the fire was set. Just as an example, they do things just to get something done. It's like the old Potsy the cop days. That's my big worry. Communication. I had a foster kid who's black that went through a whole bunch of stuff when he was growing up with police simply because he was black.
Yeah. I mean,
so I know how out of touch
Alameda
they are.
Has that history. We had the incidents of the cops using racist language on the radios, and it's something that Shrub monitors. Anytime there's an issue around police behavior, we look into it. But I'm
just out of curiosity. The cop that used the racist language, is he no longer a cop?
I can't tell you that, but the assumption is he's not. But I can.
Okay. He's probably still a cop. He probably put him through it. Someone like that, he's got to have a policy. Goodbye.
Probably not here.
Okay, probably a cop, but probably not here. Okay, well,
he is a cop, but I don't know because it's been a while. But let me tell you about kind of our relationship. When I first got here, the attitude of the police was, and it was an attitude against both Alameda Point and at that time what was the Buena Vista apartments. Is, these are troubled areas. We're going to go in there with all the force we can. So I would see, for example, a fight between two kids out here, and you would get 5, 6, 7 police cars respond, and they had their automatic rifles out to stop a fight between two juveniles. Just way over responding. The police chief at that time bragged about the fact that he was able to get equipment, SWAT equipment, other equipment, because of the dangers created by Buena Vista Apartments and Alameda Point. And at that time, and we would meet with the police on a monthly basis around what was going on out here. They would continue raising all these concerns, and the city manager at that time was there was a contingent of city staff or city leadership, including folks on the city council, who were looking at any way they could to get rid of the collaborative. And so, we would keep getting these calls saying, if your crime rate continues like this, we're going to consider you in violation of your agreement and kick you out. But it was it was that upward spiral, so that the more pissed off they would get, the more the cops would get ordered to be out here and try and catch people. And we would have police telling me, I'm trying to find a reason to stop this person. I haven't come up with it yet, that kind of thing. That's changed dramatically. Nowadays, and we get reports from the police. So first off, our crime rate is as low as other parts of Alameda. In fact, in some cases, it's lower because which is robbery, which is one of the major don't come out here.
Right, you don't steal from yourself. Right.
And it's not necessarily our folks that are stealing anyway, so it's not stealing from yourself. You go where the money is. But 70% of the calls for service now are calls from residents themselves to the police. That used to be just the opposite. And that represents a comfort on the part of the residents here to get the police involved. And that hasn't always been the case. The police have done a lot of work. There's police officers that specifically request this beat, and they practice a community policing because they get what's going on. Do we still get the occasional cop that's a jerk? Yeah, but you're going to get jerks in every line of business. And you know, do I warn every new employee here that they will get a ticket eventually on the way to work or back because there's cops out there looking for somebody rolling through a stop sign or something? Yeah, but
right. And this city, we have 25-mile-an-hour speed limits, and this city, it makes
all gotten tickets.
Pardon?
We've all gotten the tickets. Yep.
Right. But not just the tickets. They make no bones about the fact that these tickets go into helping the city coffers.
Yeah. You know,
right.
we recently looked at Shrub looked at the homeless condition in Alameda, wanted to get a sense of how many homeless there are. And so we involved the police in this, and one of my concerns, quite frankly, was the police. You know, if they knew we were going to go out there and do a count, they were going to kick people out before they could. There's actually, and it comes down to the individual. There's an individual policewoman who has taken it upon herself. She has put together so many fantastic resources for homeless that she encounters. She's put together her own resource guide. She's got phone numbers of providers throughout the East Bay so that she can call somebody at 2 a.m, say, hey, I've got this gentleman who's homeless, he's a vet, he needs services. She can get a crisis team. She's done this on her own, but she's a member of the Alameda Police Department. And
does she live in Alameda, I'm guessing?
I don't know that she does, and I would honestly doubt that she does, and I'll tell you why in a minute.
Okay.
But this is now being adopted by the police as part of their protocol, so that when they're encountering homeless, they're not just kicking them out. They're providing them with resources, and where needed, they're getting additional resources in. So, cops are cops. Most of the time, you're not going to meet them on a good day. You know.
Right. For either of you.
Yeah, but
I mean, they have bad days every day. I can appreciate it's a tough job.
In general, I'm just
I also
really
think that the cops and the firemen ought to be living in the city.
Well, here's an interesting thing. So, and I actually asked a policeman about it. We had a policeman who was on our board of directors, and we have a member of the police now who's on our board and does great work for us. He used to live in Alameda, and one day he was at the store, and he was there with his wife. He ran across somebody that he had arrested and had been convicted several years before, and was now out of jail. And as the guy walked past his wife, he made a slashing move across his throat, and then pointed his finger at the guy's wife and like it was a pistol. And at that point, here's what the officer realized. He signed up for the job. His family didn't. And his family shouldn't be exposed to that type of threat, harassment. He moved out of the city, and I don't blame him a bit.
I don't know the circumstances.
If he's living in Alameda,
what motivated
he's never
this
leaving
guy,
the job.
But what would motivate? He was convinced. Well, you're right.
Revenge.
That's a good. I'll let.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Is it a concern that a lot of the police and fire aren't living here? Sure. I mean, in my spare time, I'm working. I'm part of a disaster response committee, and that's one of the things we talk about. How are you going to? It's great if you have it's not great, but if you're going to have a disaster, have it during work hours. What if you have one at 2 a.m. when most of the staff is off island?
Right.
So it's an issue, and it's something that we're looking at.
What would you recommend for the winner of this this campaign, the new mayor or the incumbent who will be going for another term if she's elected? What would you recommend the first thing that they try to tackle? Try to get your mind off your own coalition out there, which I don't blame you for thinking of first, by the way. But what's the first thing that should be tackled by the winner of this election?
Well, I think there's two first things. One is one has to be the financial health of the city, and you have to you have to tackle contracts. You have to deal with pension reform. That has to be done, and it's not going to be an easy fix. It's something that's going to preoccupy the administration for the next 4 years.
And can you see how it may disturb me a little bit that Mayor Gilmore takes contributions from the people that she's going to be negotiating with, and I put that in quotes, negotiating with, as opposed to appeasing?
Well, how is it different for her than it was for Trish when she took money from the Teachers Association, who she was going to be negotiating with as a school board member? She took large sums of money from the Teachers Association when she was endorsed by them. So I get that, and in an ideal world, you would want everybody to run a campaign on $1 that was given by the government. I think they both, and it was the same with Trish and the teachers. They had mutual respect for each other. They're able to sit down and have tough conversations. And I think the same is true now. She's able to sit down with the fire department and have tough conversations and not be emotional. I mean, we just went through a huge spate of fires, not just the arson fires, but during that period, there were fires every other day that people were losing their homes. I don't think there was anybody at that time, and I sure didn't hear Trish stand up at that time and say the fire department's overpaid. We're paying for more than we're getting. And fire departments, police departments are the kind of thing where you pay for the worst case. And quite frankly, over the last few weeks, we've had the worst case scenario, almost. But regardless of that, there's still reforms that have to be made. There's changes that have to be made. This whole idea, and I'm a huge fan, as you could tell, of the fire department, the work they do, because I see it here all the time. But I still think there's room for improving the whole pension. As a person who has no pension and never will, I think it's a little too much. So that's job one. It's really stabilizing the city finances. I think the second thing they need to work on is people losing their housing because of dramatic increases in rent. And I phrase it that way because I'm not sure that rent control is the solution. I don't really know right now what the solution is. There's a couple ideas that I've had, a couple other folks have had that may help, but I'm seeing people losing their housing because the rent is being raised so dramatically. And something has to be done about that. So that's the two issues.
Hey, I'm back. My phone kind of died, and we lost Doug at the same time. But I just wanted to thank him for a terrific interview, and it was informative and fun for me, and I hope it was for you guys. I will end the segment the way I do most segments. I implore you, Doug, if you're listening, and I'm sure you will be, to keep your humor dry, keep your dreams wet, keep your kids out of recruiting stations. Military recruiting stations are bad. And keep your kids off the laps of clerics wearing dresses, just to be on the safe side. And most importantly, keep on keeping on. Adios, folks.